The hearing will come to order, and I apologize we're starting 19 minutes late, but the Senate has just concluded 2 votes on the floor, and it is my hope that the other senators will be able to join us shortly. It should be quite obvious to us by now that the NASA budget rolled out on February the 1st in the President's request was, to use some NASA words, it was in an off-nominal fashion. I can tell you for a fact that the perception is that the President has gutted the human spaceflight program, but that, in fact, is a perception. That is not a fact. I know the President, and I know him to be a true believer when it comes to this nation's spaceflight program, especially the manned program. And that is the reason that the President has, in part, decided that he is coming to the Kennedy Space Center April the 15th. And we will hear from the Commander-in-Chief himself when he hosts that meeting to discuss his new plan for NASA and for the future of human spaceflight. I think the administration will focus on the goals, the strategies, timelines of their plan. And I think that the President will lay out an underscored commitment to the development of technology to pursue a goal that was articulated by the NASA administrator here in this hearing a couple of weeks ago. I think this conference is going to be an important step in response to the concerns that have been expressed by the American public as well as by their representatives in Congress. And I expect the President to lay out his vision and what the goals and the timelines are for America's manned space program. Now, the question is, what are going to be the elements of bringing about a major R&D effort for ultimately a heavy lift vehicle to get us out of low Earth orbit, which, as the President has laid out, the good news of his budget has been lost in a lot of the misperception. Good news of his budget that NASA is a little civilian agency, and he is recommending a $6 billion increase for NASA over 5 years. That's a fairly sizable increase given these financial times in which one of the main things that the U.S. government's got to do is tackle the budget deficit and start driving it down to get us back into balance. The other major piece of good news that has been overshadowed, and I never cease to be amazed as I talk to people, that in what I have just talked about, the perceptions, this news has been completely lost. And that is, in the budgeting up until now, the International Space Station was going to cease to exist in 2015. Which, of course, was absolutely ridiculous from a budgetary planning standpoint, because we hadn't even got it completed yet. and it's just about to be completed and equipped so that with its designation as a national laboratory, that it can start to achieve some of the science through experimentation in the zero-G environment that we've all hoped for, and therefore in the President's budget, he adds a lot of extra expenditures to keep the space station going until at least 2020. It is my hope that the President will also recognize the angst that is out there in the NASA family, because not only are we in a recession where various parts that have a major part of the employment of the nation's space program are severely hurt because of high unemployment figures, which is certainly the case in Florida. But the angst is out there because all of this dedicated team that is the finest launch team in the world is facing the layoffs of jobs, and all of this is coming at the time of a difficult economic time of an economic recession. And this is coming not as a result of these budget decisions, but budget decisions and safety decisions that were made years ago. And therefore, because these budget decisions were made over the last half dozen years, the new rocket is not ready when the space shuttle is going to be shut down. And as a result, there is a gap without an American vehicle to launch crews to the International Space Station. And that has caused a great deal of angst, as it should. Because if you're laid off of your job, it's not a recession, it's a depression. All of this is coming at a time then, because the word in the President's budget was used, cancellation, instead of the word restructuring of Constellation. It has caused a good bit of angst, understandably so. Now, what to do about it? Well, the President's policy that he's proposing to us, which is the subject matter of this hearing, is that the trips to and from the space station for both cargo and crews can be done cheaper and more quickly by letting the commercial sector compete in the free markets with NASA oversight on the human rating to get crews up and back from the space station. And I know it to be the President's intent that simultaneously that he wants the vigorous R&D work in the development of the new systems to take us beyond low Earth orbit. And I think in large part that's what he will be addressing when he comes to the Space Center. There's one other little iteration that I would certainly encourage him to consider, and that is that there is a fifth shuttle that can fly. It is held as the launch on demand as a rescue shuttle if any of the remaining four get into trouble. But the risk for the fifth flight would be de minimis because of the increased volume in the space station that should some kind of puncture of the orbiter occur on ascent in the fifth flight, they could rendezvous and dock, take safe harbor in the International Space Station, and then there would be time through the Soyuz modules to return that crew safely to Earth, if the worst did happen. But of course, NASA has so improved since the destruction of Columbia, so improved its ability to make those flights safe. And so I would argue to the President to have a fifth shuttle flight. If you ask about additional flights, well, the hard reality sets in. It has been planned for the shutdown of the space shuttle for some period of time. And therefore, the external tank which would drive future shuttle flights are not assembled and are in disparate parts. And when I asked this question of Bill Gerstenmaier, you have parts out there for 3 additional tanks. How long would it take you to get that? And he says by the time you recall the workforce and you get the parts where they can be assembled and you can do all the checks and you can get additional parts that you need that you don't have, he said it is 2 to 2.5 years down the road before you could fly. And as a practical matter, that doesn't solve our problem to wait around another 2.5 years, when in fact the space shuttle is scheduled to be shut down after the 4th flight. I'm hoping the 5th flight will fly. And so we turn to you all. We turn to the commercial people, and that's what we want to explore here today. COTS is being executed in 2 phases. The first period of private industry development and demonstration of the various space transportation capabilities to and from Earth orbit. This phase, which has already seen a significant investment on the part of NASA, will be funded according to the President's request at $312 million in the fiscal year 11 budget to expedite the pace of the development. And the second phase is competitive procurement of orbital transportation services to supply the ISS. And this phase will be funded through the Space Operations Mission Directorate under the ISS Cargo Crew Services line, beginning in earnest in fiscal year 2011. Now, on commercial crew to the ISS, the effort was initiated using the 2009 Recovery Act funds. That's otherwise known as the stimulus bill. And that enables future commercial crew launches to the ISS. Space Act agreements were awarded to 5 companies in February of this year to demonstrate the various technologies and capabilities necessary to reduce the risk of flying crew on commercial vehicles, with completion milestones in November and December of this year. And then the follow-on commercial crew program, under the President's recommendation, is $6 billion over the next 5 years to support the development of commercial crew providers, then to whom NASA would turn to competitively award transportation service contracts that are similar to the cargo resupply services contracts. And this program is going to be open to a broad range of commercial proposals, including the human rating of existing launch vehicles, the development of spacecraft for delivering crew to the ISS, which can be launched on multiple launch vehicles, and the development of a new high-reliability rocket system or systems. And so what we're going to do today with all of you experts is we want to take a look at these plans and see how this fits into the broader goals and the visions for NASA. A vision that has been stated by the NASA administrator ultimately to go to Mars, and we'll see what the President says. Now, what we'd like to glean from you all is also better understanding of how that $6 billion for man-rating the systems is going to be spent. And we want to explore the safety and regulatory aspects of the new plan. And obviously there can be no compromises on safety. I will put into the record a lengthy statement that the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel has stated on exactly that. And so it's going to be important that NASA work with the industry to complete a coordinated human rating draft by the end of this year, by the end of this fiscal year, which ends September 30th. And contracting commercial services is another area of interest, which is going to be critical here. How will funding be allocated to this effort during the R&D phases and then during the operational phases? And how will investments be divided between government and private sectors as the capabilities move forward? And how do we ensure these commercial entities remain viable once they have taken responsibility for these extremely important missions? And so we're also going to hear from some of the companies today who are competing in this effort to better understand your capabilities and timelines and challenges. And so instead of introducing all of you at once, I'm just going to go right down the line and I will introduce each one of you. Your written record is inserted in the record and made an official part of the transcript. What I'd like you to do is be mindful that we have 7 up here, and I've already taken too much time, but I wanted to set the table. If I can hear from you all each about 5 minutes, and then we'll get into a lengthy set of questions. I'm in no hurry to leave this afternoon. Our first is Lieutenant General Tom Stafford, United States Air Force retired, the acclaimed astronaut who flew down close to the surface of the moon, who flew that mission that in the midst of the Cold War brought about a little bit of thaw as a Russian, then Soviet spacecraft rendezvoused and docked with an American spacecraft, and the crews lived together for 9 days. And he's going to discuss the impact on astronaut safety in transitioning the delivery of the crew from the Space Shuttle and Soyuz to the future commercial spacecraft. General Stafford, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be invited up here before you today to testify on the matter of crew safety and human spaceflight. And in wake of the Augustine Committee report and now the 2011 budget, the issues that you outlined, Mr. Chairman, it is imperative that this Congress should carefully consider and understand all the potential ramifications and the proposed changes to be made to the program that NASA has pursued and that the Congress has approved over the 4 years of human spaceflight recently. And before proceeding to answer the question, I'd like to make just a few observations concerning the Augustine Committee report, and then particularly my experience with the Gemini program, which was taking an existing vehicle and modifying it there for human rated standards. And one of the most important observations of the Augustine Committee was the underlying concern and the deliberations on the future of human spaceflight has been adequately funded for many years now, and you've already outlined that, Mr. Chairman, in your discussion. And it's really inadequate in certain ways what they had previously to carry on the core effort. The Augustine also pointed out that the heavy lift launch vehicle will be required for the flexibility to visit the moon and other areas. Now, the plan that NASA had proposed has been approved by this Congress was a program offering the strategic vision for human spaceflight that was demanded by Admiral Gaiman and the Columbia Accident Board. It is a program worthy of our nation. And the Augustine Committee noted, as you pointed out, sir, that at least $3 billion per year must be added to appropriations to accomplish that mission. He also pointed out that Mars is should be the final and ultimate destination for human exploration in the interplanetary system, but that the flexible path or visit the moon is also not mutually exclusive, and I agree completely there with that committee. The choice is plain: either we'll provide the funding necessary to accomplish the worthy objectives of our nation or secede to leadership. And I think everyone has understand that, and you elegantly outlined that in your effort there. And I've talked to many other members after I was the first presenter to the Augustine Commission, Mr. Chairman, and after the committee had its findings, I've talked to the ones I knew personally, told them that I agreed with about 90% of their findings, but I had certainly a different point of view in about 5 to 8% of their findings. And I'm not familiar with all aspects of the proposed 2011 budget or all the aspects of NASA's response to it. And I certainly agree with, as you outlined, the remaining space shuttle flight should be launched on schedules compatible with safe test, checkout, and launch operations. And then that fifth shuttle we have on standby on need could be launched very easily if a small amount of funding was available, and that would certainly enhance the viability of the International Space Station, Mr. Chairman. Now, again, as the Augustine Commission had its findings extending, that was one of my first recommendations was to extend it from 2015 to 2020, and that is in the budget, as I've read in a macro view. And to have and use this great international laboratory requires this guaranteed space transportation capability as soon as possible after the shuttle retirement. But also the Augustine Commission had the finding that responsibility be removed from NASA and offered to commercial providers. Yet today, approximately 83% of every NASA dollar goes to commercial providers directly. And I'd like to differentiate the two subjects. I think you've already mentioned it, Mr. Chairman, concerning the commercial crew delivery to the station and commercial cargo delivery to the station. And for the commercial cargo delivery, there first has to be the development and the demonstration of a safe, reliable booster to Earth orbit, which is yet to be demonstrated. And the second issue, an autonomous transfer vehicle to go from low Earth orbit to the station in a safe manner that will meet the ISS visiting spacecraft standards. This was recently completed by the European Space Agency's ATV and Japan's HTV. The ATV was approximately 2 years late from its target and required approximately 1.3 billion euros for development and delivery of that first vehicle. The HTV was over 1 year late in their delivery. With respect to the commercial crew launch delivery, I'd like to recall my own experience of Gemini since we modified existing vehicle. I flew 2 Gemini missions on modified Titan II boosters, and then, as you know, 2 Apollo missions, one on the small Saturn and one on the giant Saturn. For a period of 13 years, I was with NASA, who experienced the development of high reliability of boosters, spacecraft, and launch abort systems. And then, on Apollo to Gemini 6, the world's first rendezvous on that mission, the Titan II ignited and shut down at T0. and we had the liftoff signals, and a fire broke out down below. But the extensive modifications that NASA and the Air Force had made to that booster made it possible that I'd be speaking before you today, Mr. Chairman, and not be in some obituary column. So I have a significant interest in the safety. And there were several black areas of the launch trajectory of the Titan II Gemini program. It was basically the Titan Gemini program was a high-risk demonstration program which would not be acceptable today in terms of safety. And I think it's important for all the commercial providers here today to understand that when the NASA first put forth the idea of flying the Gemini on the Titan, the Air Force strongly resisted this. The program manager in his production line did not want modifications going into those vehicles. And it escalated all the way up to the Deputy Administrator, Dr. Robert Siemens, talking to the Secretary of the Air Force, and then finally Administrator Mr. Jim Webb and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara signed off on an agreement. And in that, the elements for the Titan that would go to Gemini would be had special quality assurances in the plant in Denver, but a complete separate program line was set up in the Martin, Baltimore plant. And there, the modifications were put on it, dual redundant hydraulic systems, all the series modifications, standpipes, accumulators to prevent pogo, and from that. The Aerojet company that supplied the engines first and second stage had special handling of those for the Titan and escort with them all the way to install at the Martin plant and stayed with the booster all the way to the launch at the spacecraft. So it was very extensive what we did. And we all spent hundreds of hours both at the spacecraft and with the booster in that period of time. So it was not simple to have that whole effort there. And it's interesting to note that after the Air Force NASA experience on that, the Air Force modified their boosters with a lot of our programs that we had in there. And from there, the safe, reliable delivery of government crews to the ISS involves a human rating of the launch vehicle, the spacecraft, and the launch abort system. And the successful integration of all three elements has to be there. The safety goal for Apollo, sir, which I flew, had 0.9999, 4 nines. Now, I know the astronaut office has put out a paper that has 3 nines. And when you go beyond the third 9, it may be insignificant. But this is a desirable number to meet, and it has to be demonstrated. And the process begins with the design, the construction, all the way through, and just not given on a piece of paper. It has to be demonstrated and checked. Unfortunately, the Augustine Committee report gave only a brief mention of crew safety for launch operations and reentry. And regrettably, there were no in-depth discussions of the vital issue of this crew safety launch and orbital return to crews. It was just taken as safety is a given. And I've mentioned that directly to Norm, so he knows about it. And maybe that the complexity of developing a new government crew space transportation capability and the difficulty of conducting space flight operations and safely reliable is not fully appreciated by those the present systems being developed by NASA and the early adaptation of presently non-existing commercial government crew vehicle alternatives. There seems to be some belief that if NASA would just step aside, then private alternatives would rapidly emerge to produce a safe, reliable, dependable government crew delivery space transportation. And human spaceflight is the most technically challenging demand of our own time, Mr. Chamber. It is far more demanding than military fighter aircraft, which takes thousands of hours of test flight than operational test and evaluation before it's put in service, and the same way with commercial airline before they are put into commercial service. And we've learned a lot over those years, but we know that there has to be this demonstrated reliability. And it's interesting to note, I read the Augustine report in great detail, and it said if less constraint budgets were available, they could fly as early as 2016. But again, looking at the present budget, There was a slight increase, but it wasn't to the increase that Mr. Augustine had in his findings. It did go on to say with an item I agree, the committee recognized the development of commercial services to transport crew come with significant program risk. And then it goes into there. One risk is it could detract from the delivery of the cargo, but the second one is if the commercial community fails to deliver this crew vehicle in mid-program, then it would revert back to NASA. And the big issue there for NASA and the whole country is how could it revert in a meaningful way to NASA when all their support contractors are gone, and furthermore, a lot of the civil servants have left. And it went on to say there are simply too many risks at the present time to have a viable fallback option of not having risk mitigation. So the question is, how do we have risk mitigation when, as far as we know, the present program is pretty much eliminated? And there's one minor thing, too, at the end. It said that they need to be multiple providers for this. And this would be similar, sir, like we have the F-22, which I'm sure that every member knows about, the most capable aircraft in the world, air-to-air combat, and the most expensive, which is recently terminated. That started as the YF-22 and the YF-23 by the Air Force. And developers chose the 22 for development, test, evaluation, operational test and evaluation in the service. Reading the report, and I talked to the person who wrote this chapter. He said, yes, you need both. So that would be like taking the F-22 and the F-23, taking them all the way. So that would take many tens of billions. So on that one, I disagree, Mr. Chairman. So there's many aspects to this, and there's a lot of things that has to go forward, and I do not believe it can happen in any short period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, General Stafford. Our next witness is Mr. Bryan O'Connor. He is Chief of Safety and Mission Assurance at NASA. He is an astronaut, Marine Colonel, will address NASA's human safety rating requirements for commercial spaceflight. Colonel O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
By the way, I was liberal in my allowing General Stafford the use of time. I'm going to be a little more observant.
Yes, sir.
He's earned the right to be heard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, he's about 4 ranks higher than I am, so I'll take 4 minutes off mine. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today to discuss how NASA will ensure the safety of its human spaceflight missions for transport of NASA and NASA-sponsored international partner crew members to the International Space Station. The President's budget request cancels the Constellation program and funds the agency to contract with industry to provide astronaut transportation to the ISS as soon as possible, reducing the risk of relying solely on foreign crew transports. NASA will take on this new challenge with appropriate respect for our hard-learned safety lessons of the past. As you know, the launch or recovery of a spacecraft is a very dynamic event involving tremendous amounts of potential and kinetic energy. Furthermore, operations of any system in the proximity of the ISS pose their own safety integration challenges for both vehicles and the crew. Therefore, through its program management, its systems integration, human rating design, technical checks and balance, and proactive safety culture, NASA makes every effort to address flight crew safety in a transparent and disciplined way. As we've been reminded by our human spaceflight accidents and close calls over the years, X-15, Apollo, Space Shuttle, systems integration should not be underestimated. Also, our spaceflight vehicles traditionally have been certified by NASA to carry crews in an engineering flight test environment. It's important to note that the job of validating the right set of requirements for a new crewed flight system is not a simple cookie-cutter or checklist task, nor is it expected to be a one-time task. We still see to this day new safety issues on a space shuttle after 130 flights. Therefore, we're always looking for ways to improve our risk posture by continuously questioning our assumptions, encouraging dissenting opinions, refining our models, and providing appropriate oversight and/or insight to the work of our contractors. The first step on the road to confidence for the next ISS crew transport capability is establishing an acquisition approach for our government industry team. To support that approach, we are developing performance requirements, including safety risk metrics and a generic set of NASA human rating technical requirements that would be applicable to any ISS-bound crew transport system. We expect to issue a request for information to industry soon to help us, and we're working closely with the FAA because of its obvious interest in future regulatory activities for commercial human spaceflight. To that end, the decision to transition our ISS crew members from Soyuz to any new vehicle will be based on confidence. This confidence will be based on a combination of NASA technical insight into the design, appropriate levels of management oversight of the development and operation, along with demonstrated capability and reliability of the components, the subsystems, and the integrated flight and ground system. In closing, I'd like to reiterate that safety is and always will be NASA's first core value, and that everyone in the agency is dedicated to ensuring that our astronauts are trained and equipped to safely conduct our spaceflight missions. Chairman Nelson, I'd be happy to respond to any questions you have or any other members as they come. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. Dr. George Nield, the Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation in the Federal Aviation Administration, and he will address the FAA's role in regulating the commercial spaceflight industry and the licensing and certification process. Dr. Nield.
Chairman Nelson, thank you for inviting me to participate in this hearing on commercial space transportation capabilities. I'd like to start by briefly reviewing the role that the Federal Aviation Administration has played in regulating commercial launches over the past 25 years. In accordance with federal statute, the mission of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation is to ensure protection of the public, property, and the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States during commercial launch and reentry activities, and to encourage, facilitate, and promote commercial space transportation. Our top priority is safety. Some of the ways we carry out our safety responsibilities include developing and issuing regulations, granting licenses, permits, and safety approvals, and conducting safety inspections during every licensed or permitted launch. Our safety record to date has been excellent. Since 1989, we have licensed the launch of 201 commercial vehicles without any loss of life, serious injuries, or significant property damage to the general public. In 2004, Congress expanded our regulatory role when it approved the Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act of 2004. In response to the Act, we have issued regulations governing human spaceflight on commercial launch vehicles, making it clear that individuals participating in these flights must be fully informed of and accept the significant risks involved. One of the key challenges we are facing right now involves the beginning of a new segment of the industry, suborbital space tourism. We are currently working with about a half dozen companies that are in the process of designing, developing, and testing vehicles that will be capable of carrying people up to the edge of space. We know that not all of these companies will be successful. Some will experience technical difficulties, while others will struggle with the necessary financing. But there are enough very capable and well-funded groups currently working on this effort that I'm confident that in the next few years we will see multiple companies conducting several suborbital launches per week. That will mean hundreds of launches per year, with thousands of people having an opportunity to experience spaceflight firsthand. With that background, let me speak to the FAA's approach to regulating the launch of commercial vehicles carrying humans to orbit. Certainly the process will not be easy. These are challenging matters, not easily reducible to checklists or go, no-go criteria. But I believe that there is enough goodwill, skill, and ability among the involved parties to produce appropriate government oversight and regulatory frameworks. To begin with, the FAA already has a solid working relationship with NASA. For example, it has been decided that all of the launches for the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, or COTS program, and the Cargo Resupply Services, or CRS program, will be licensed by the FAA. So as the launch operators demonstrate the ability of commercial vehicles to deliver cargo to the International Space Station, NASA and the FAA will have the opportunity to demonstrate that we can seamlessly provide the needed government oversight for cargo missions, well before any commercial crew missions are scheduled. NASA has built an unequaled body of experience carrying humans safely to and from orbit. No one has done this work better than NASA across nearly 50 years of human spaceflight. At the same time, the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation has more than 25 years of experience in regulating commercial space launches. The work before us is to harness both of these assets and come up with an approach properly suited to the safety and success of the challenging missions to come. This is an historic opportunity to put to work, side by side, decades of space operations and regulatory experience to write the next volume of American excellence in spaceflight. The FAA is excited to be part of the story. Chairman Nelson, this concludes my prepared remarks. At the appropriate time, I would be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Nield. Mr. Malcolm Peterson is the former NASA Comptroller, and he is going to address the practical obstacles to NASA's utilization of commercial carriers for cargo and crew, such as pricing, procurement, and contract issues. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I just want to point out something that in terms of NASA's safety record, I think I would put the Russian Soyuz program up against our safety record. It is not we are not unparalleled. And it is important to remember in this case, in this discussion that we are having, that we are talking about a commercial venture. Now, a commercial venture means that private money is at risk. It normally also means that the private venture is willing to obtain insurance at a reasonable cost, and that it can have, in addition to investors, it can achieve bank financing to handle letter of credit issues and the like as it experiences its manufacturing processes. We have the equivalent of a commercial crew capability to the space station right now. We have had it in the past. It's called the Soyuz. The commercial U.S.-sourced crew carrier will be in a competitive environment with the Soyuz. It will pose a great challenge to them other than the required business, if you will, from NASA carrying government astronauts to compete for other astronauts. If you think of it, whether it's tourist or what have you, I think it will be a price competitive environment, and the current price for a Soyuz, I believe, is roughly $150 million for 3 crew. That will be a very difficult hurdle. Now, the question that comes to me as an old NASA controller is, why are we doing this? And that question goes to the heart of the ability to sustain governmental support for a development. If you don't have a good argument for sustaining that development, it will fall apart over time. And I am deeply concerned about the investment risk that goes with this, one of which is, if I am an investor and I'm looking at the horizon for the return on my investment, what is that horizon The space station's continued existence is not assured. We are on unknown territory in terms of the longevity of the space station. We have technical risks. We have programmatic risks. One programmatic risk was seen by the last administration, which said, let's not fund the space station beyond 2015. Now, whether or not I believe that was a false, canard, doesn't make any difference. They were willing to say that space station enjoyed so little priority that it was better for the U.S. to put its energy into beyond low Earth orbit activities. I do not know whether other governments, such as the Japanese, the Canadians, the European Space Agency, or the Russians, will have similar questions as we go forward. I would not discount the possibility, nor would I discount the possibility that the investor community will look at the risk associated with this venture and want to have what in essence would be a guaranteed return on investment consistent with its risk. That risk hurdle for a venture like this should be on the order of 40 to 45%. It is, therefore, in my opinion, a difficult case to make that this will be a commercially successful vehicle without extraordinary participation by the U.S. government. I want to say how much I enjoyed listening to General Stafford. I know all too well what the costs of human spaceflight are. They are not in design. They are in practice. They are in documentation. They are in the paper trail. They are in endless reviews to make sure we're doing the right thing. There are so many cameras down at the Cape for every shuttle launch that if you were doing a practical view of how to save money, you certainly would not proceed that way. But that is the price of human spaceflight. We do not like to kill people, and nor do I think we should. By the way, I think commercial cargo will succeed very well. I have my doubts about commercial crew. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Michael Gass is President and Chief Executive Officer of United Launch Alliance. He's going to address a strategy and a timeline for supporting crew to LEO and the possible obstacles to such development. Mr. Gass.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. The 3,900 women and men of United Launch Alliance are honored to be able to support our U.S. government and commercial customers' missions with the most reliable, best value launch services with our Atlas and Delta rockets. Formed in December 2006, United Launch Alliance is a 50-50 joint venture of the Lockheed Martin Corporation and the Boeing Company. The formation of ULA brought together the launch industry's most experienced and successful expendable launch vehicle teams. The Atlas and Delta expendable launch vehicles have supported America's presence in space for more than 5 decades, with over 1,300 launches with impressive records of mission success. And I'd like to say that our heritage also includes the Titan that General Stafford talked about. Members may recall that the first American to orbit the Earth, John Glenn, was lifted into orbit on an Atlas rocket. Since then, the launch vehicles have evolved through innovative improvements accomplished by generations of engineers and technicians into today's expendable launch vehicle fleet. The rocket Glenn flew was used by both the Department of Defense and NASA, a concept that was right then and is available again today. Before I get to the central questions you asked, ULA as a commercial launch service provider would like to offer our support for the administration's proposed plan. As I stated to the Augustine Commission, our nation must have the constancy of purpose to have a strong human and robotics, science, and exploration program. The plan that's proposed transcends any one company or agency solution, and it has the ability, if executed properly, to be affordable, sustainable, and flexible. The administration's plan makes long overdue investments in research, technology development, and upgrades to our launch ranges that are essential to ensuring the United States remains the world leader in space. One critical investment that will have benefits to all future national security, civil and commercial space mission is in our space liquid propulsion technology. I urge members to support these important technology investments. The plan also has the potential to foster and grow commercial space opportunities. But I think it's important to note, given today's topic, that the consolidation to form United Launch Alliance was done in part because the commercial market projected in the late 1990s did not materialize as was originally expected, and the remaining market was insufficient to sustain two healthy launch services providers. Therefore, we believe the nation's human access to space should not be solely dependent on the success of future commercial markets. Now let me address what ULA, as a proven launch service provider, is willing and can do to meet the demand for human-rated launch services under the administration's proposed commercial crew program. The EELV rockets provide the quickest and safest approach to closing the gap following the retirement of Space Shuttle. ULA believes there is a unique opportunity for NASA and the DoD to leverage the existing EELV systems toward meeting NASA's safety and reliability requirements for all missions at lower cost. ULA also believes that the system architecture of our EELV is extensible for future exploration beyond low Earth orbit. We will be working with multiple companies that will compete for crew services, and we plan to provide launch services in support of their proposals. We will apply our products and teams fairly in support of all of these companies. By leveraging the billions of dollars of private capital that ULA and our member companies have invested and utilizing the existing launch infrastructure, we can support their test flights within 3 years. Use of EELV fosters a strong launch industrial base that enables efficient access to support numerous missions. In the past, our nation had specific launch programs that served niche payload markets and separate systems for NASA and DoD, each requiring separate infrastructure and industrial capabilities. This was inefficient and less reliable. In regards to the human rating questions, can EELV be human rated to support commercial crew? The simple answer is absolutely. How quickly could these rockets be ready for human-rated flight? The rocket will be ready before the crew vehicle, primarily because the rocket already exists and is flying. The Atlas and Delta EELVs were designed from the outset with the primary goal of being as safe and as reliable as we possibly could make them for our customers. EELVs are tasked with launching the most sophisticated, highest priority national security satellites. They also must get to orbit safely. What does it take to human rate EELVs? Crew safety must be treated as an integrated solution between the crew vehicle, an inherently safe launch vehicle, and combined with a robust abort capability. ULA believes changes to the rocket are minimal. The basic rocket itself would remain the same, and we would add emergency detection systems that would provide the crew vehicle the necessary information to trigger a safe abort if needed. ULA looks forward to the opportunity to work with NASA to validate our approach. On the ground, pad modifications need to be made primarily to accommodate crew ingress and egress to the rocket. The cost and complexity of these facility changes are relatively modest to the existing launch complexes, but depending on flight rates, dedicated human launch facilities should be considered. In summary, ULA supports the nation's human spaceflight program and stands ready to assist in making it successful. EELV-based solutions provide a near-term, reliable solution for flying humans to low Earth orbit. Use of the EELV fleet promotes synergy with national security space community, provides NASA with scalable options for heavy lift exploration needs, and provides a foundation for U.S. space launch industrial base to prove its international competitiveness. Thank you again for inviting me. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gass. Frank Culbertson Jr. is the Senior Vice President and Deputy General Manager of the Advanced Programs Group of Orbital Sciences. He is also an astronaut, and he will discuss Orbital's role in the crew development capabilities. Mr. Culbertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. And Senator Hutchinson, good to see you again. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this hearing regarding commercially developed crew delivery to low Earth orbit. I'm truly humbled to be a part of such an esteemed panel. I'm sitting here between two presidents, at least one PhD, a financial guru, and a couple of my heroes, including a general. So it's nice to be a part of this company, and I hope I can shed some light on what Orbital Sciences intends to do to support the programs going forward. As you know, Mr. Chairman, when you put on the suit and get in spacecraft, you have to depend on a lot of people to make sure that things are going to go right. Those of us that do that are oriented toward achieving mission success through thoughtful management of risk. Everyone who flies has the utmost confidence that the dedicated men and women of the NASA contractor team do everything humanly possible to ensure crew safety. That fact must not change as new programs and goals are developed for human spaceflight, including in the commercial world. At Orbital, I'm responsible for oversight of our programs relating to human spaceflight, including not only cargo resupply and the Cygnus spacecraft with its Taurus II launch vehicle, but also the development of the Orion launch abort system for the Constellation program, a key element of any spacecraft with humans on board. In addition to our 28 years of work in other areas of spaceflight, such as satellites and launch vehicles, Orbital is totally committed to supporting the future of human spaceflight in this country, as well as to exploring business approaches that will continue to make space more accessible and productive for all potential users. We have over 200 successful launches behind us, 500 successful missions, and we have 900 missions either on order or completed to date. And the company is well versed in the complexities and intricacies of flying into space. Given the stated concern as to whether the commercial space industry is robust enough to develop reliable transportation services for crew to low Earth orbit within a reasonable time, at a fair cost, and most importantly, with the requisite safety margins, Orbital believes, as do I, that U.S. industry, given the right conditions, relationships, and investments, should be able to develop and demonstrate safe and reliable crew transportation systems for access to the ISS. NASA's proposed funding of about $6 billion over the next 5 years, together with the addition of appropriate private capital, should be sufficient to enable at least one and probably two commercially provided crew systems to be demonstrated by 2015. I'm confident that commercial providers and NASA can work together to establish the proper safety and performance standards, fundamentals of which are already well established, that will enable industry to continue the current successful era of U.S. human spaceflight, both for U.S. government missions and for other markets as they develop. I would also expect that industry will make proper use of NASA's manpower, expertise, and physical infrastructure to enhance safety and mission success, which will help maintain and build our national competence in these areas. An important factor in motivating future generations to do the hard work required to continue to carry that leadership banner. This effort will require close cooperation with NASA in developing full understanding and implementation of the appropriate human rating standards, especially at the system level, as has been mentioned previously on the panel, and a robust, reliable crew escape system. Once we have developed, tested, and certified our transportation service, I would be happy to volunteer to strap in once again for a mission to ISS. If I am not willing to join the first mission of an orbital-developed spacecraft that I share responsibility for, then no one should be on that flight. I mentioned that to my boss, and in that same vein, our CEO, Dave Thompson, made it very clear to me yesterday that if I'm going, he is too. He just doesn't want to go without a pilot. It's difficult to envision commercially provided crew services being conducted entirely by industry with a hands-off approach from NASA, which is currently being debated. Nor can these commercial services be provided efficiently with traditional levels of government involvement and oversight at every turn. Rather, to be successful, commercial suppliers must work closely with NASA and other potential customers at key milestones and reviews, providing insight to the program and demonstrating the willingness to listen to the technical judgment and leadership of NASA's seasoned government contractor human spaceflight team, much as we now do on the COTS program. In addition, the FAA relationship must continue to grow and mature in order to establish a proper regulatory regime for commercial crew activities. Indemnification, insurance, and liability are all key elements in determining how we go forward. This is serious business, and the appropriate balance of insight and oversight are mandatory, as are open, transparent communications with the customer. Just as the Shuttle Mir program was preparation for producing the collaboration and joint operations being used so successfully in the ISS program, COTS is providing superb learning experiences not only for developing new hardware that can fly to the station safely, but also the operations concepts, the relationships, and the lines of communication that will enable all sorts of commercial endeavors in the future. The challenge is to develop and operate commercial low Earth orbit transportation systems that will service not only the U.S. government, but also the other markets that can be imagined. Since 2008, Orbital has been fully engaged as one of the two companies to provide delivery of cargo to ISS. We have made steady and valuable progress in that short time. We expect to have achieved all but 3 of 21 NASA program milestones by the end of this year, including successful completion of the critical Phase 1 and Phase 2 safety review milestones. The first launch of our Taurus II rocket from Launch Pad 0A at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport on Wallops Island, Virginia, will occur next year. This progress is aided by the hard work and cooperation of many talented people at NASA headquarters and several NASA centers, as well as the FAA, the support of Virginia and Maryland through Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport Authority, the efforts of our teammates, suppliers, international providers, and the internal corporate support we receive to resource this program. Please note the addition of state and local agencies and organizations in their new roles and levels of investment, a key ingredient in achieving commercial goals. Extension of the International Space Station is one of the cornerstones of a sound future in space, both scientifically and commercially, as we strive for more distant destinations and new technologies continue to be developed. Based on my personal experience on board the station, I firmly believe that the ISS is an ideal platform for development and simulation of the operations, technologies, and techniques to execute more ambitious and lengthy missions to the Moon, Mars, and other destinations. While on board, I often imagined what it would be like to take that station and fly it to Mars or place it on the surface of the Moon. What else would I need beside what I had? In addition to a regenerative life support system and better radiation, I needed a reliable supply line or else a heck of a lot more room. But we have to have the support of our commercial industry in order to keep that station going. We can simulate missions to Mars, simulate missions to the Moon, and evaluate the technologies that are going to be developed to allow us to go further on that station. Extending it to 2020 is the right thing to do, and we support it fully. In closing, please allow me to mention that as an astronaut and a manager, I've had the privilege of working on a variety of missions which generated vigorous debate as to their advisability and even their safety. But in the end, the right decisions were made to enhance our national security, extend international cooperation in space science, and increase the capabilities of the International Space Station. Clearly, the NASA budget that was recently delivered by the administration has generated a firestorm of discussion that is rarely seen on the topic of space exploration. I sincerely feel the pain of some who are at the center of the storm, as well as those who feel threatened by elements of the budget. But I welcome the fact that finally we are having a broad and fervent debate on the nation's future in space. I know that a lot of energy is being expended at NASA to provide increased specificity of the goals, so I am hopeful that a thoughtful and thorough examination of the available paths forward will result in an ambitious, sound set of programs that will both maintain our leadership in space exploration and inspire and challenge us as a nation to attack ever tougher problems. Like this hearing, promoting meaningful dialogue within the relatively small but passionate group of people who truly understand and care about what it actually takes to execute what so many take for granted, that is, reliable access to space, will help move us in the right direction. And I expect U.S. industry to support these next challenging national space endeavors as it always has, with professionalism, excellence, and innovation. Our nation continues to inspire people throughout the world with our commitment to freedom, creativity, exploration, and commerce. Opening the right doors for industry to participate more broadly on a commercial basis will help maintain and enhance America's leadership on the space and economic frontiers. Thank you again for inviting me to appear before this panel, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Culbertson. Ms. Gwynne Shotwell is president of SpaceX, and she will discuss SpaceX's progress and obstacles in developing crew capabilities.
Chairman Nelson, Senator Hutchinson, on behalf of the nearly 1,000 employees at SpaceX, I'm honored to be here to address the questions that you've provided. It's probably no secret that SpaceX is fully supportive of the NASA budget and plans for commercial crew and cargo, and we're grateful for the support that this committee has provided to date. As a fast-growing entrepreneurial U.S. launch services provider that competes daily for both domestic and international business, having the support of Congress and the U.S. government is vital to our success. Of the over 30-plus space launches we have currently on our manifest, NASA represents just under half of those, and so they're a critical customer. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the proposed fiscal 2011 budget and specifically their proposal to use commercial launch service providers to bring crew and cargo to the International Space Station. Although this has been a matter of policy and law since 2004, we recognize that some still question whether the commercial space industry is up for this challenge, even with the significant support provided for in the budget. Accordingly, I want to answer 3 questions today. Initially, first, can SpaceX develop a capability to deliver crew to the ISS, and if so, when? Second, can SpaceX perform crew missions regularly and safely? And third, is a commercial crew program critical for the United States to explore other destinations in the solar system, such as Mars? The simple answer to each of these questions is yes, and I'll follow up with a few detailed remarks. Regarding timing, SpaceX firmly believes that we can get astronauts to the International Space Station within 3 years of contract award, largely based on the fact that our Dragon capsule was designed from the inception to carry crew with minor uprating from our cargo vehicle. Since the company was founded in 2002, we've designed, developed, and successfully launched the first privately financed liquid-fueled rocket, and we've gotten that vehicle to orbit twice in a row. Under the COTS program, we are on track to demonstrate cargo capability to the ISS within less than a year. This demonstration will then be followed by 12 commercial cargo resupply missions to the ISS. Although our Falcon 9 launch vehicle and Dragon spacecraft have been contracted to carry cargo currently, we certainly have an existing option under the COTS program to carry crew as well. Given that, as I mentioned earlier, both the Falcon 9 launch vehicle and the Dragon capsule have been designed since inception to accommodate crew. In fact, because our spacecraft must approach and berth with the ISS, many of the crew rating criteria will have already been verified on Dragon before we get to the ISS. We are therefore confident that we can complete all necessary enhancements for Dragon, demonstrate Falcon 9's reliability, and be ready to fly astronauts to the station within 3 years. Regarding safety, SpaceX plans to fully comply with any and all safety standards set by NASA and the U.S. government. We believe the notion that NASA would place astronauts on an unproven commercial rocket is simply an unrealistic concern. Falcon 9 and Dragon will fly numerous cargo and operational flights to the ISS before ever carrying crew. SpaceX has contracted over 24 Falcon 9 flights, some of which are Dragon flights as well, and we're adding new missions to the manifest by the end of the month, actually. If development problems ever arise early in the Falcon 9 or Dragon program, those problems have plenty of time to be resolved and demonstrate the service reliably. Commercial vehicles are inherently reliable, as demonstrated by the long-proven heritage of the Atlas and Delta programs. There's nothing inherently unreliable about a commercial service. There's been significant debate over what it means for a rocket to be man-rated. NASA is only now establishing commercial human rating requirements. Notwithstanding, SpaceX designed the Falcon 9 and Dragon with all the known NASA requirements in mind. In fact, SpaceX has gone even further. For example, Falcon 9 is the only launch vehicle, foreign or domestic, that can survive the loss of any first-stage engine. This was a capability that both the Saturn I and Saturn V rockets had, and they were used to save astronauts' lives. Going forward, SpaceX will comply with any NASA-published human rating requirements, and we look forward to engaging with the agency on crew rating our systems. Let me be clear, as we've been criticized on this point, SpaceX is not looking for a free or easy ride with respect to meeting any NASA-imposed crew rating criteria. Lastly, some have criticized NASA's fiscal year 11 budgetary vision for lacking a destination beyond low Earth orbit. SpaceX firmly believes that using commercial crew and cargo services for LEO will free up NASA resources to focus on exploring other destinations in the solar system, such as Mars. By engaging the commercial sector now, NASA will be developing procurement processes and techniques that will help enable the government to cost-effectively manage future exploration efforts. Specifically, if NASA relies on commercial companies like those represented here today, much the same way that the defense and national security community relies on us to protect the payloads and precious homeland and troops overseas, NASA can focus its great mind and limited financial resources on what NASA has always done best, pushing the frontier and exploring worlds beyond. Mr. Chairman, the nearly 1,000 men and women of SpaceX appreciate your time and your attention to this matter. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shotwell. Senator Hutchinson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late, and I will have to leave after I speak. I was glad to hear some of your testimony. I have to get back to the floor because we have the FAA reauthorization bill. But I'll just summarize my statement. I think many people know that I introduced legislation that would, in fact, try to continue shuttles. I don't see how we have a goal of keeping the space station open until 2020, and not have a big gap, which the chairman and I have fought together for a long time, and not have then the reliable capability to get crew there. So I would like to continue the shuttles, and am certainly looking for a way to achieve that without taking away from any of the other commitments that are being made. I have for a long time supported the commercial orbital transportation systems. I do certainly support commercial innovation, and I think in the end we will have commercial capabilities, but I think this gap is too important to rely on just commercial and not continue our capabilities with the investment that we have made and the reliability that we have. So I think that going forward, we need to go on two fronts. I think we need to explore the commercial side and let the commercial side come forward and prove the reliability. And certainly, Mr. Culbertson, if you and your CEO are willing to go up on that first one, that would be a good test. But I don't think we ought to shut down the shuttle system, and particularly it's not just the system, it's also all of the people who are necessary to keep the system safe, secure, with all of the requirements that we would have for a shuttle. You can't, it's not just the flight, as all of you know. It is all of the backup that is necessary. So I appreciate your holding this hearing. I think it is important that we have all the information that we can, but to, I think, prematurely stop the Constellation program and not move forward very firmly on keeping the space station not only open but usable within our own capabilities is not good common sense, and it's certainly not using our taxpayer dollars wisely. Relying on Russia to fill the gap is equally, in my opinion, unreliable and unsupportable. And I would rather keep our own capabilities, use our own resources for that, and invest in the commercial for the future, but only when the commercial is completely tested and ready to go. So that's my overview, and I hope, Mr. Chairman, that you and I will be able to begin to work on a plan that is both supportive of commercial but also keeping the systems that we need in place to assure that America can go into space on its own, relying only on ourselves for the future until we have the commercial vehicle or the crew return vehicles in place and ready to go. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to hearing the further questions that you will ask, as I'm sorry I have to go back to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. General, from your perspective, having flown several vehicles, what assurances do you think are going to be need to guarantee that these commercial vehicles are safe to fly on? Put your microphone on, General.
Mr. Chairman, the criteria that NASA has developed over the years in the NASA Safety and Mission Assurance has worked very well, and this has been learned over nearly 5 decades, and that there has to be both insight and oversight and, special care before anything should ever be said it is safe, and it has to reach that 3 nines of reliability, sir.
And to you, Colonel O'Connor, has NASA defined a process to validate what the commercial providers are saying in compliance with human rating requirements?
So, Mr. Chairman, we do have a process that we just completed at the preliminary design review for Constellation, which includes all the same types of ingredients that you would have in a process to validate requirements and to verify that they've been met. There's one additional thing, though, and that is that we are open, as we have been with Constellation and other programs, to industry showing us that they can do something that we call out as a shall statement or as a requirement that meets or exceeds. We're open to tailoring, in other words. So that's a piece that will be involved anytime we start a new program, including this one. We plan to put out an RFI here in the next month or so, and to get some feedback from industry, including any ideas they have on how they might substitute some standard or some approach that they have that they believe is as good as what we suggest in our requirements. So that tailoring, iterative back and forth process would go on with any new program, and it would with this as well.
And Mr. Peterson, is it going to take $6 billion to make this crew ready over the next 5 years?
That is a great question, and I have no clue. I know that it is not a Gemini redo. I think the example of Gemini is interesting. It may be the only appropriate analogy that the Augustine Commission could come up with, but it is by no means one that I would say was appropriate to the level of confidence required for you to appropriate funds.
How would you suggest for us to determine whether or not $6 billion is too much, too little, or just right as we start the budgetary process?
Well, I don't think you can do so at this stage without numbers on the table, estimates, designs, procedures, the whole 9 yards. Our history, and it bothers me to say this, but our history is not exactly one of unparalleled excellence in cost estimating what we have never done before. We manage to miss it usually by an order of magnitude or so. So to say $6 billion is a good number without an understanding of the program details, processes, requirements, funding, commitments, all that is beyond my ability.
But you felt fairly confident in getting cargo up on commercial vehicles.
I think cargo is well within our capability. We do it constantly. If you think of delivering spacecraft to orbit, we do that. We have the most difficult areas, which are the rendezvous and docking with the space station. There are systems that are now certified for doing that. I believe they would be at least GFE'd by NASA to the company. It is, I think, a relatively straightforward, not easy, but straightforward job. I think the competitive environment for cargo is such that the economies of scale, at least on the launch end, will certainly prevail. I think it's a good business case that can be made. and I would proceed with that without any hesitation.
Mr. Gass, what would happen if the Congress decided, since the Congress controls the purse strings, that we wanted to take the $6 billion projected by the President over the next 5 years and use that not for human certification of the commercial vehicles, but instead to accelerate the R&D for a heavy lift vehicle for the Mars program?
Well, with any major program, just as Mr. Peterson talked about, the rate and thoroughness of the program is a function of how much we can afford on any given day. So if we apply more resources to the Mars activity, I think we're going to we'll achieve that goal sooner. The key on all of this is really keeping that balance throughout the entire industrial base. That infusion, this importance of this whole debate, is making sure that we have the constancy of purpose to keep on exploring and having that constancy of funding. How we apply it is a system design activity. Whether or not we are going to low Earth orbit as our first priority or going to Mars as our first priority, that foundational step of propulsion investment, some of the other technologies we need to explore Mars, has to be done someday. And when we apply those funds, we'll increase our rate of achievement.
Colonel O'Connor, is the astronaut office involved in the certification validation process?
Absolutely, yes, sir. We have what we call a four-legged stool, and we apply that four-legged stool as a governance model whenever we have what we call residual risk. Residual safety risk, when you have human beings involved, means that we need volunteers. We don't force anybody at NASA to take residual safety risk. The other three legs of the stool, of course, are the program manager, who gets the last opportunity to accept that risk, but only if the other three legs of the stool, which includes the safety officer, the technical authority, which is the owner of the requirement we're talking about. The particular issue always has an engineering or technical authority owner, and then, of course, the volunteer. So if the technical authority is okay, the safety guy is okay, the crew is happy to volunteer to take on that risk, then and only then is the program manager allowed to accept the risk. Why do I bring that up? Because it happens a lot in design and development of these things, and as well as in operations. When there's a waiver, a deviation, a new issue comes up which is a little over the risk that you volunteered to take for just by signing up to do this job, in other words, the inherent risk of spaceflight, we quite often do have residual risk issues that come up. And the crew office is very much a part of that because they are the people at risk.
How have, Colonel, the Russians minimized their risk over the years? And then I'm going to ask General Stafford.
We've been working with the Russians for quite a while. General Stafford will tell you how it all started. But in 1995, we decided that it would be a good idea to fly one of our astronauts on the Soyuz. We look at this as an analogy to some of what we're doing today, because we wonder, how did we get confident enough to say it's okay for our crew member to fly on the Soyuz? Only recently had we really understood what was going on in their space program. It had been kind of secret there for a while. We didn't know all the details of their design or even of their failure history. But in the early 90s, it opened up, and we talked a lot with the Russians. And we sent engineers over there for about 3 years from the safety and mission assurance and engineering organizations, not to lay on requirements. This is a case where we developed our confidence to put crew member on some other vehicle that we did not design and we do not operate, and requirements, or what we're calling the human rating requirements, were not a part of that. We didn't lay any requirements on that system. I know that General Stafford, when they did the rendezvous in Apollo-Soyuz, NASA did have a couple of requirements that they put on the Soyuz to make it an appropriate interface when they docked. But this was a case where we were going to either accept the Soyuz to fly Norm-Thagard or not. And it took us a while, but we got to the confidence level we needed. One of the key ingredients when we didn't have requirements verification was this business of equivalence. They did things differently than we did. We might have a requirement for failure tolerance. They didn't have it written the same way, but we looked at it and we decided that, they have an equivalent approach here, even though it's not exactly like ours. And it took us a while, but we finally got comfortable with equivalence. And then the last ingredient, which was probably the most important for that adventure, was their demonstrated reliability. They had, I think, 67 flights in a row since their last casualty. And that's a pretty good demonstrated reliability. So all those things added up, and in every case, we will look at the combination of insight, understanding, trust in another government organization, like we've done with HTV, ATV, Soyuz, and the demonstrated reliability, and add those up to the point where we get confident enough to fly.
General Stafford, did you want to add to that in how did we achieve the confidence in the Russian system?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I started back when it was a Soviet system. At the height of the Cold War and everything was Bolshoi secret. It was a big secret. But yet in that effort, we went straight across the table with them, and they opened up to us, and we made requirements. They changed at least 2 valves on the Soyuz, some electrical issues on the Soyuz, and they opened up some of how they approach safety. As Colonel O'Connor said, it's somewhat not the same way we do, but the end product is nearly the same. And so we were satisfied with that, and we flew that. And then, as you remember, sir, because of my former experience with the Soviets, now the Russians, I chaired the Shuttle Mir Advisory Task Force and had oversight of that, looking at safety issues. And from there, again, we looked all into the details of that. And then now the International Space Station, which I chair the advisory panel on. So the Russians do a very good job, and it's slightly different than ours, but yet they end up with the same place.
All right, let me ask you another question with regard to both the Russians buying a seat on the Russian and buying a seat once they get their vehicles human rated. How can we, the taxpayers, be guaranteed that the seats are going to be purchased at a fair market price? I'm looking at you, but if somebody else wants to take it.
Well, the accountability in Russia is somewhat different, and it's good to see my old friend Mr. Peterson, and he's an expert on financial affairs, but they didn't quite understand the profit issue back in the Soviet Union. I think they certainly do now, and they have a demonstrated effort, and now it goes for approximately, I think, $50 million a seat, include all the training. And this requirement that they have to support the station is up in the year 2012. It'll probably be renegotiated. And unfortunately, the Russian ruble is appreciating while the American dollar is falling. And I do not know what it will end up as. But how much it is subsidized, we can't tell. But I don't know. It'll be very difficult to match their price this time, sir.
Mr. Peterson, let me ask you with regard to American vehicles. How can we make sure the taxpayer is getting a decent price?
We're not going to be able, in my mind, to compete against the Soyuz. Our fair price is going to have to be a amalgam of our national interest in the venture, and however we want to parse the value of being able to create a commercially viable vehicle. If it is price alone, I believe the Russians can undercut us with relative ease. I doubt that we could launch an equivalent vehicle for $150 million. I'd be surprised if we could do it for less than $400 million.
So, sounds like you're saying that other than the national interest of having an American vehicle to fly to and from the space station, that just from a price standpoint, you're suggesting we might better use that $6 billion instead of man-rating them, go make a faster and better heavy lift vehicle.
Well, I believe the issue that puzzles me is why the administration did not accept the recommendation of the Augustine Committee to continue to work on the Orion spacecraft and have that as a warm backup. The envisioned simple spacecraft that the Augustine Committee talked about, I've referred to in my written testimony probably caustically as a Soyuz wannabe. That's a little bit acid, I agree. On the other hand, Orion leapfrogged the Soyuz, and we were going to prove Orion's reliability by taking it to the space station, getting the maturity that comes from repeated trips, and then, of course, being able to venture on to beyond low Earth orbit. I think I'll stop there, probably having shot myself in the foot more times than I want to count, but thank you for offering me the opportunity.
All right. You're do that because you're a former comptroller. Let me turn to Ms. Shotwell and Mr. Culbertson and speak for your companies on that question.
I appreciate this opportunity. I'm here to say that we can guarantee crew flights to the ISS for less than $50 million a seat.
By what year?
3 years from the time we initiate. And the reason why it sounds so quick is because the Dragon vehicle was designed really from the outset to accommodate crew with a number of key developments still to do, but developments that we're comfortable with.
Do you have to have all the $6 billion to develop it?
No, sir.
How much?
I prefer to answer that question slightly differently, if you don't mind. If you were to spend all $6 billion on a commercial crew and everybody were to make our bid, have the same bid as ours, you would have somewhere between 5 and 10.
Between 5 and 10 what?
5 and 10 suppliers.
Mr. Culbertson? Mr. Chairman, I don't think I can be quite that optimistic as Ms. Shotwell, but we've looked at the previous systems that have been flown, and we've looked at how we develop spacecraft and what it takes to ensure that they're going to be not only accomplish their missions but be safe and reliable. One of the benchmarks we looked at was the development of the shuttle itself. When you look at it on a per-pound basis, the shuttle was about $150,000 per pound for development. If you were to take that number, and it's fairly similar for other vehicles, but if you were to take that number for, say, a 20,000-pound vehicle that you needed to carry 3 to 5 crew to the space station, that works out to about, if it's a 20,000-pound vehicle, it works out to about $3 billion for development. Given today's productivity and efficiencies that we have, we think the number could be significantly less than that. But at least that gives you an upper bound on a conservative approach of what one company might need to do that level of development. And in terms of the cost of each individual mission, I think Mr. Peterson's right. It's probably around $300 or $400 million if you're going to have all of the ancillary programmatic capabilities dealt with by the company that's providing that. A lot of it depends on how much NASA provides and how much the company provides, and how much you're going to have to invest in mission control, launch operations, recovery operations, training, all that goes with flying humans in space. So the number is pretty wide in that regard. And as far as the government investment required for a program of this size, to have that type of upfront investment and the low number of flights that are currently envisioned, you've either got to work aggressively to grow the market and ensure that you do have sufficient demand for the seats, or you're going to have fairly significant government investment up front in order to cover the development costs. And those are things that we're going to have to work on very hard in the future to make sure that we get into the right box.
Let me shift from crew to cargo and ask you for commercial cargo, what lessons can U.S. companies learn from the development efforts of the ATV and the HTV?
Who's that for?
Anybody.
Okay. I think we should see that as a challenge. There are other countries that are developing cargo capability ahead of us. The Russians did it a long time ago with Progress. ATV and HTV, though expensive and somewhat behind their original schedule, have demonstrated their capability to deliver cargo to the crew, to the space station, semi-autonomously. I do believe it's well within the capability of U.S. industry to do that, as we in SpaceX are demonstrating and will demonstrate concretely in the coming year. And I think that's capability that we should continue to build on, not only just to provide cargo, but provide other support for the station and other markets that come along. I think that as more and more vehicles are developed that will use space as their place of business, having the commercial world ready to support that is an important aspect of what this country ought to be able to do, whether it's servicing other satellites, repairing them, recovering them, working on orbital debris, providing access to other platforms for scientific experiments. I think that's all within the realm of our commercial industry.
Well, General Stafford, you pointed out in your written testimony that the Europeans and the Japanese were years behind in their schedule in delivering payloads to the station. Is that going to happen with the rest of these folks?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know from the position as chairman of the advisory task force, kind of the oversight committee, that we watched that in that 2 years plus, and the Europeans put a lot of resources and 1.3 billion at least euros at least advertised. The Japanese we don't know, and they put a lot of their top engineers resources on it, and they were over a year late. So, you know, as former Deputy Chief of Staff of the Air Force to Research, Development, and Acquisition, I've seen a lot of great forecasts come in from commercial companies, what we call the hot biscuit items, and they're always usually undercosted and underscheduled what really happens.
We have had 2 votes called on the floor. Of necessity, I'm going to recess the committee. I'm down to the remaining 5 minutes to vote, to cast my vote on the first vote, and I will cast my vote on the next vote immediately at the beginning and race back here. So the committee will stand in recess. Okay, the committee will resume. Dr. Nield, what do you anticipate to be the greatest challenge facing the FAA in developing appropriate regulations for ensuring public safety in commercial spaceflight operations?
I think we have an excellent foundation based on our assessment of what the future is going to bring. And Congress has given us some excellent guidance on how we should handle crew and how we should handle public safety. And so we've done the best we can to set up that regulatory environment. But until we really see these vehicles fly, we're not going to have the demonstrated track record. We're not going to understand how well that's going to work. So I think this transition, as we see both the suborbital space tourism type operations in the next few years, and then eventually some of the orbital flights, first with the cargo, then that'll really enlighten the community in terms of what additional or different regulations we might need to put into place, and it'll give people a better calibration in terms of the overall difficulty of satisfying some of these challenges that we face.
Well, should the FAA be involved at all with regard to these rockets going to and from the space station?
I believe we have an excellent relationship with NASA, and we need to continue to work together to figure out the best approach to take. But I would just point at our track record to date in working through both the COTS and the CRS programs. I think we've worked together well. We've taken advantage of the FAA licensing regime and all the benefits that it can bring in terms of ensuring public safety and the insurance and indemnification and the cross waivers. All those things are available as part of the overall regulatory process. And NASA brings to the table its unique experience in terms of human spaceflight and spaceflight operations, and we think together that can end up being a win-win for the government and for the industry.
In cargo operations, what you've done would apply, but are there any new regulatory authorities that you believe the FAA will require with regard to crew development activities in going up to the space station?
I would say that given the guidance that Congress has provided so far, which is that, again, under the Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act of 2004, Congress clearly stated space transportation is inherently risky, and we can't forget that. We need to protect the public on the ground. Now, how can we minimize the risks as much as possible during these risky and experimental flights? I think we have a regulatory environment that works right now, recognizing that NASA may well have specific mission requirements that it wishes to impose, for example, to ensure the safety of the International Space Station, or human rating specific requirements, and they would be certainly free to do that within the contracts that they agree to with industry. So I think there is a potential way ahead that would take advantage of the strengths of each of the organizations.
Well, since the FAA is involved in safety of airplanes, does it have any business in getting into the question of human safety in spacecraft?
Based on direction from Congress, yes, we already have that responsibility, and we look forward to working with the Congress and with the other stakeholders, including NASA, in improving our environment going forward.
Well, I passed the first Commercial Space Act back in the 1980s, and I never intended for the FAA to be getting into this. Now, I know that NASA is not a regulatory agency and therefore needs to work with the FAA to establish regulations, but I don't want to get this into a situation where we've just got extra layers of bureaucracy to go through just to get a crew up to the International Space Station. General, you're smiling.
Well, Mr. Chairman, when we talked about government crews, to that, I think, and that really the only one that really has the expertise to write that is going to be NASA and what Colonel O'Connor has with his group as far as government crews. If you talk about civilian crews going to some other thing that is non-government, could be a completely different issue. But I agree with you, sir, you don't want layers of bureaucracy, but for government crews, I think it should be NASA, period.
Mr. Gass, could an EELV be integrated with a smaller crew exploration vehicle?
Yes.
Could you, for example, could you integrate it with one that had 3 astronauts instead of 6?
Yes, we've looked at many configurations. You know, as we've talked before, United Launch Alliance is a merchant supplier, so we're working with many companies. But we have done work with the Orion program and some other different configurations of various sizes. Inside the EELV fleet, we have all sizes of rockets as well. But at the high end, we talk about an Orion or Orion Light vehicle and have that capability, have the launch infrastructure ready to go so we can support that kind of crew vehicle, which is kind of, it's for work for LEO, but it also goes LEO and beyond. It has that basic capability for future exploration. The other side is true LEO vehicles that have been optimized for low Earth orbit and they would use the lower end of our launch family. So at United Launch Alliance, we're prepared to support the wide range of options that are being considered. And we're doing work with all of those systems right now, and using everything from our low-end Atlas rocket, basic single-stick rocket, to the big Delta IV Heavy, are options for all of those configurations.
If you were told go, how long would it take you to do a CEV?
I think working with the CEV team, I think we could have an unmanned test flight inside 3 years. And the reason I say that with some credibility, we're working on some of the most complex national security spacecraft that come with a whole lot of complexity of integrating spacecraft to launch vehicle. Working that depth of integration, assuming that the CEV, the Orion-type program is moving along and funded properly, and it's making its progress, I think we could have that first flight in 3 years using existing launch infrastructure. Full human flights would probably be in the 4-year time frame, and we're looking at different launch pad options.
You could do unmanned in 3 years and then be ready to fly humans to the space station in 4 years.
Correct.
Okay, now Ms. Shotwell says that she can do it in 3 years.
Name that tune.
What's that?
We can play Name That Tune, but it's again that working with credibility of what are the interactions between the different contractors, NASA agencies. There's clearly options, and we look at the spectrum of an all NASA system to an all commercial system. There's in between, and I would look at what I just referenced as kind of an in between kind of solution. Strong government involvement, a vehicle that is more extensible than just low Earth orbit, that gets that added complexity. You go on the simpler side to true commercial to LEO, it could probably be done more expeditiously.
And Mr. Culbertson, you said that it would take a little longer than 3 years, if I recall what you said earlier.
3 to 4 years is what I said, sir, because as was pointed out earlier, development programs typically take longer than originally estimated, and I'd like to set the expectations appropriately right now, because we really don't know what the requirements we're going to be working to are exactly. There's a lot of uncertainty in exactly how that will impact our system, how much interaction we'll have to have with NASA and the FAA, and what will be required of the company to certify our system. And so there's a minimum number, there's a maximum number. That maximum number could go out as far as 5 under bad circumstances, but I think 3 to 4 is a reasonable estimate that most of industry could probably subscribe to.
Okay, if it were 5, that was the original schedule for the Ares 1. It was going to be in 2016. So any way we look at it, we're looking 5-6 years relying on Russian spacecraft to get crews to the space station.
At least until 2015, yes, sir.
At least until 2015.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Depending on when you wave the green flag,
That's correct.
That all depends on the budget.
Let me ask Ms. Shotwell and Mr. Culbertson. We're going to try to make some decisions on our authorization and work with the appropriators on which way we're going. What assurances can we tell our folks that your timetables for supporting the station won't slip?
Given where we are in the stage of development of both Falcon 9 and Dragon, we're very confident with the 3-year timetable that we've laid out. I don't know how to assure that other than we are committed to doing it. We have the Falcon 9 vehicle at Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral right now. It should be ready to fly within the next month or so. The Dragon spacecraft, the first Dragon spacecraft for NASA, will fly in July. And keep in mind that, again, Falcon 9 has been designed to accommodate a crew rating certification, and the same with Dragon. So we're not starting from scratch. You'd really have to look at the development timelines that we've had to date for Falcon 9 and Dragon and add to that the 3 years that we're talking about now moving forward, and then the timelines don't look ridiculous by any stretch.
The timeline we're working on right now for COTS has slipped a few weeks and months over the time that we've had the contract, but not an unreasonable amount given that the complexity of the job and the late award of the contract to Orbital for the COTS demo mission. So we've stayed pretty close to our original milestones with a little bit of slip. I'm not going to give you a timeline for commercial crew at this point because we don't honestly have one because we don't know exactly what the requirements are going to be that we're going to have to meet. We're working on those things. It would be premature for me to make those kind of statements at this point until we see an RFP and we see the standards that Bryan was talking about and understand what that would require us to do. But once we set a timeline, we will try to set it as realistically as possible.
I'd like to ask the three of you that have the commercial carriers. I don't think that this scenario will occur, but you've got to have a business plan for it if it did. And that is, what happened if there were some emergency on board the ISS and they had to vacate the ISS so that cargo and crew services by commercial providers was not necessary? What happens to your companies? Mr. Gass?
Thank you, Senator. First, I'll kind of reiterate what Mr. Peterson said. You know, when we deal with these kind of high-risk investment issues, there's an underlying market risk, there's technical risk, and there's operational risk. What you just described is really the market risk. That first off is the market of the U.S. government buying services, very secure, and then what happens if something catastrophic happens for it to end suddenly. That basically precludes why any rational investor would put in private capital into this market. There's got to be some other reason why we're doing it. So unless the government program is structured in such a way that that investment cost is covered with either some sort of termination liability, it's going to be very difficult to attract true rational investment capital.
Mr. Gass is correct. In general, you would have to make sure that you had some kind of protection if you were particularly investing billions rather than what's currently being invested. As far as our current cargo contract, if the space station were to cease to operate, then yes, that would be a business impact to the company. Orbital is structured in such a way, and we're broad enough in our business base that it wouldn't have a major impact on the company, but it would certainly be something that would change our plans over the next couple of years. We're working on a mission-by-mission basis, on a fixed-price basis, and what we have to order ahead of time, we order ahead of time. What we don't, we wait until we need it. And so we just have to balance all of those impacts. I do think that if something like that were to happen, we would certainly offer to work with the U.S. government to come up with a solution to reman the station, resupply it, and figure out if there is a way for the commercial world to help restore a laboratory like that. I think it's that important to the country that we ought to all work together to come up with solutions. It might be expensive, it might be difficult, depending on the problem, but I think it's something we ought to all have as a contingency plan.
The market for SpaceX launch services is quite broad because we compete internationally as well. So there's no question that if we were to lose the cargo resupply contract that we have now, it would be a hit to our business case, but it would be by no means devastating. As I mentioned earlier in my testimony, we have 32 flights on our manifest right now, 24 of which are Falcon 9, and we're about ready to sign another 10 or so. So it would be a hit, but again, we don't go from something to zero. We still can provide Falcon 9 launch services for satellite providers, and we also have other customers outside the U.S. government that's interested in Dragon.
Of your 30 flights, how many are COTS flights for cargo?
3 are COTS flights, 12 are CRS flights, and the remaining are satellite delivery flights. Actually, there's one commercial Dragon on the flight as well, on the manifest as well.
There's one what?
Commercial Dragon.
Ms. Shotwell, what assurances? Well, we covered that. Do you all have any? Do you have any more? Okay, I think we have gone through all of the questions that we want at this point. Are there any concluding comments that any of you all would like to make? General? I knew you'd have something to say.
Well, from my experience going back to Jiminy, sir, that everything is taking always longer than what was forecast on every program, and in most of them, it's cost more money than was forecast. So, and I don't know, you can check with Mr. Peterson. I don't know if he's experienced anything, any difference, but that's been my experience for 40 years, sir.
If we are serious about the commercial cargo and commercial crew as a matter of national policy, I would recommend to the committee that you put, with the help of the appropriators, sufficient funds on the table to allow a program to proceed without hindrance from the funding process and the potential shortfalls in funding that stop progress and prevent cause rework and all those things that delay activities. I also believe that you're going to want to look at, if it is truly going to be commercial, some form of protection for the investors. If you're going to get commercial money, they're going to have some basis to know that they're going to do so with at least perhaps recovery of their invested capital. They'll probably lose their opportunity cost of capital. I don't know if I'd pay them interest, but I think it is wise to assume that this is going to be a difficult process to raise capital, and we should take some steps to mitigate that risk.
Well, just to maybe build on the same thought from first, I think we shouldn't beat ourselves too much. There's been great successes in our space industry where we have been able to deliver on schedule within cost and continue to improve over the generations. This is a risky business. When we talk commercial and have the U.S. government being the main buyer, that is a little bit of an oxymoron of mixing different market areas. So we need to be careful of what we're really trying to buy. I think the U.S. government being a smart buyer, moving from a full indigenous internal capability to start using commercial enterprise to help support that mission is something that I think is very doable, but it needs to be in a measured approach, and we stand ready to support.
You all have been a very illuminating panel, and we thank you very much. We're plowing new ground here in a time of exceptional opportunity. So I want to thank you for adding to the knowledge base today. You all are very kind to be here. Again, I apologize for the interruptions of the votes, but that's the environment in which we live here. Thank you all for your testimony. The meeting is adjourned.